yes, they have to stay through. Right, so are there any apologies for absence, please? Dave Ward and Billy is subbing for him, and I think you know Marcy is unwell, and she has treatment on Wednesday, so we've got Marcy. Declaration of pecuniary interest. Minutes of the previous meeting, and I agreed. Any matters arising? Yes. Right, so first of all Russell and then. Did you give the page number?
Page 1. Can the direct updates on Benedict School? I
think it's in. Okay, so
can you use your mics, please? Thank you.
Well, for that conversation, no, because we were just establishing how much we could
No, I understood that, but you were about to start.
So, a sponsor has been identified for Benedict School. There is no transfer date. We understand the sponsor has been named to parents. So, is that right, Russell?
There was another question I was taking on much of us.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch what you said.
The SCN transfer contract as well, 1.2. You got any update on that? I know the last meeting was over a month ago, so probably not. It's the third bullet point.
So it's not just the directorate. Corporately, there's been a piece of work done. The initial report, as I said, has been received, and we're looking at it. The next opportunity that we have for cross-service discussion is a shared meeting between ourselves and communities and housing next week. So we're progressing it in discussion because it's a corporate report rather than just for SEN Transport that includes that as well.
Thank you.
All right, Russell.
Yeah.
And make sure your point you wanted to raise. Well, it was to respond to the action, which was to provide a percentage in relation to the increase in care proceedings. So Carl is just about to share some performance information around. So we've gone a bit further than just giving you the percentage, and I'm giving you War and Peace, I think. And when the paperwork has come around, I will speak to it. Can I just say, Carl, thank you very much for doing this. So we've got it before us. That's lovely. Thank you. Okay, so we've looked at the rate of care proceedings over a longer period than just 1 month to the next, because depending on the issues for a family or the number of children in a family, the numbers of children and families in care proceedings can fluctuate month by month. So looking at a trend over time is more helpful than looking at it month by month. So care proceedings have increased slightly over the last few months, but in the last 2 months, the numbers have been reducing and returning to the levels that we saw in October. There was a sharp increase from Merton in November in the number of children in care proceedings, where we jumped from 36 to 43, which was a 19% increase, and that 19% increase seems as big as it is because actually the number of children that we're dealing with is a very small number of children. That actually related to a very large sibling group and one family, which was predominantly what that jump was about. And so we are confident that actually what we're seeing is not a month-on-month increase in care proceedings, but the usual variation that we would have in care proceedings. So we have that increase, we know what that increase was about, and actually as care proceedings are concluding, the numbers of children and families in care proceedings is coming back down again. No doubt in the future we will have months where it will come down further, and we'll have some months where it will go up, depending on the issues for families and the number of children in those families at the time. What we also know is that we actually have less children in care proceedings now than we've had in care proceedings in previous years. So from a director perspective, we're not worried about the number of children that we have in proceedings, and we're not worried that we've got an increase that is continuing to increase.
Thank you very much for that. Has anyone got any questions? Jen?
Thank you. Just to clarify, November went up, February went down. The reason being because of the number of children. Are those children returned to the family while it went down?
So towards the end of the papers that have just been handed out to you on the last page, there's two graphs. One is a graph that sets out the children and the type of legal order that they are subject to during care proceedings. There's a range of options of legal order or no order actually that children can be subject to during that period of time. And then the bottom table sets out the outcome of the care proceedings for those children. And although that doesn't set out the numbers of children who went home, the only circumstance in which children would have gone home is if there was either no order or supervision order only. All of the other orders would relate to them either living in care or living with a connected person.
Are there any other questions? James?
Chair, thank you. I had a question in relation to care proceedings, which is later in the agenda, so I could do it now, we do it later.
Could we keep it to there?
Sure.
If it's related to that.
Thank you.
I think, do you think that would be the easiest thing to do? Keep it on together.
Is that right? And I'd say thank you for having this for us.
I'm going to change the agenda slightly, and if we can, we're going to do item 7, the cooperative parenting one, which is the thicker booklet of the two we've got. So, we have read it, and I'd like to say there's so much positive in there. It's wonderful to read it, but it's also good that you're looking at areas for improvement, so you're not just being complacent, but you're looking all the time at how to make progress, and that is wonderful to see, so thank you very much. Is there anything you particularly want to say before people ask questions of you?
Well, I think as you've highlighted, there are some really positive aspects of that report and the way that we are corporately parenting our children. There are some areas for improvement, as you quite rightly set out. I think one of the things, just to draw to people's attention, is the changing demographics of the group of children and people that we are looking after. So our group of young people are becoming older, and the proportion of young people who are unaccompanied minors is increasing. So some of that is because as a council last year we agreed to increase our participation in the Pan-London rota, and in this forthcoming performance year we'll actually see that ratio increase further. But I think those are things it's worth bearing in mind, that our demographics of the children that we look after is increasing. Our adoption performance has continued to be strong, albeit that we adopt a very small number of children, but where we do have plans for adoption, children are swiftly adopted, so that's positive for those children as well.
And just to say, Rosie very kindly, some of them we couldn't see because of the shades of grey in her some of them that are attached to the back of the single white sheet we've got. Have you got something specific to say?
Yeah, just a comment, absolutely. One thing I'd just like to add is that the report is very good, but I feel that it doesn't necessarily capture the vibrancy of our newly structured corporate parenting board in a way that justice couldn't be done by a written report. It's now a standing agenda item that we have young people who are care experienced attend, and they can be Merton residents. They've been unaccompanied asylum-seeking children and care leavers with asylum-seeking experience. And I think that it has really added a level of scrutiny and conscientiousness that wasn't there previously. And I'd just like to highlight the efforts that have gone through the participation team, as well as the sort of senior leadership engagement in that's meant that it's positive. And I think it's a really positive change to the way that the corporate parenting board runs. So that's it.
That's excellent here, and thank you for that. We can take questions now. James first, please.
Chair, thank you. Thank you very much for the report. And as has been said, there's a lot of good news in this, and some really good results. So thank you. I just wanted to raise a couple of issues. Firstly, one was an observation, 2.15, the small, on page 3, the summary, small rise in use of agency foster carers. We did debate this quite a lot last time, so we don't need to debate it again, but it just reinforces the points, I think, of the previous debate that we had, and the importance of looking at how we can reduce the number of agency foster carers. I wanted to ask, and funny enough, this was the question I asked a few moments ago, whether I could ask it at that point, but 2.12, the average duration for child in care proceedings rose by 4 weeks. I mean, that's quite significant, isn't it? And I appreciate it's out of your control to a large extent. But I wondered if you had identified the trends and the reasons for that, and whether there's anything we can do about it, because obviously it's young people in a particularly vulnerable position. And then I may as well just ask the last question, if that's okay, at the same time you can respond to both, is I had also highlighted the point that you made, 2.10, 47% were aged over 16 compared to 20% nationally, albeit that figure's higher in London. And I just thought that again, that you have identified it yourself, and I wondered what the reasons were for that. And it may be that we're receiving young people from abroad, which is a borough we've agreed to do, and it's great that we are, and I wondered if that was the reason, and if not, what the reason might be. Thank you, Chair.
So firstly, in relation to care proceedings, the timeliness of care proceedings is influenced firstly by the preparation and the front loading of work that local authorities do before they issue care proceedings, to ensure that once we are in care proceedings there isn't drift in securing suitable assessments of children and their parents or extended members of their family. And I'm pleased to report that in Merton, our preparation and our pre-proceedings work is robust, and we are regularly complimented by the court as to the quality of the pre-proceedings and proceedings work that we do. There is a local and national issue around court time and the availability of suitable judges to hear cases that are in court proceedings. And as a region and pan-London, no local authorities are currently meeting the government guidelines of best practice, which is that care proceedings are concluded within 26 weeks. Merton actually perform, although it's higher than the 26 weeks, Merton perform better than our regional and pan-London authorities, even though it's over the 26 weeks. There are ongoing discussions through the Family Justice Board and through our local. We have regular operational meetings with our local judiciary to talk through the issues with court capacity and judicial capacity. And there are currently in train some proposals to try to make more effective use of court time between local authorities and the judiciary, so that we can try to bring down the current time that care proceedings are taking. But it's certainly a joint endeavour and not one that the local authority can resolve on its own.
Okay, thank you.
In relation to the numbers of older young people entering care, I think that there are a combination of reasons for that. So I think that we have an increase in young people who case law and changes to practice over time mean that they are now entering care and are counted as looked after children when perhaps historically they may have gone down a housing route. And since we've had the Civic judgment, actually local authorities are required to assess those children to assess actually whether they require simply accommodation through housing or whether they've got additional needs and require accommodation as part of being in care and looked after a young person. I think we've also got some changing dynamics and some pressures around some young people who are experience contextual harms. So that's where their safety is at risk outside of the family home as opposed to in the family home, and that can also put pressure on family relationships. And so we have a larger group of those young people who we're looking after either to safeguard them or because those family relationships have broken down. And I think that we also see in some families some pressures around poverty and housing, and whether families, when young people become 16, 17, have sufficient income or sufficient space in cramped housing conditions to continue to care for those young people, and those young people are then entitled to an assessment and a service from children's social care if they are in need.
Thank you very much for that, and it was a really thorough answer, so thank you, I appreciate it. Just one final observation, which is that the report is very good in almost all cases, as we said, so thank you. The only observation I would make is that I felt that it was better on reporting facts than giving any form of analysis in the way that you've done. And what's interesting is the questions I've asked you this evening, and your answers are very thorough, so thank you. But of course they're not in the report because I went to look to make sure I wasn't going to fall flat on my face. But they're not, and I just passed that observation along. I appreciate that there's a limit to the amount that can go into a report like this. The facts are really helpful and they're good, but the raw data really does. It would be even better if there was some context and analysis, and where there are areas for improvement, which there always are, it's inevitable, but where there are areas for improvement to actually set those out as you've done this evening. But thank you for your answer. Thank you, Jeff.
Billy.
Thank you, Chair. I want to talk about point 2.13, also on page 3, the family drug and alcohol court service, which it points out have been wound down due to sort of a cost effectiveness review. I wanted to ask about why that has happened. So is that the result of a kind of downward trend in usage, or is it that it was never particularly fully utilised? And also about the families that are currently going through proceedings with that service, what's happening with them?
So I'll say a little bit about this because the decision took place not on Elle's watch really, but so we commissioned two different kinds of provision to work with families where their children were on the edge of care. One was the family drug and alcohol court, and the other was multi-systemic and functional family therapy. And both of those are designed to work with families to try and support children to stay safely at home. In the case of the family drug and alcohol court, it's an intervention which is very specifically for families where alcohol or substance misuse is the primary issue that's leading to children being unsafe. And what we identified was that actually the numbers of families coming through, where that was the primary presenting issue and where the family drug and alcohol court was the right response, were not high enough to merit us continuing to commission that work. So we had a very small number of families where the work was actually effective. But at the time, Merton was the lead commissioner for a big consortium of local authorities commissioning this work, and we simply justify it in terms of our own usage of the service. By contrast, the second service arrangements I mentioned, we were effectively overusing, and so we could demonstrate that there was sufficient value in continuing to maintain that arrangement. So that's why we can still work with families through other means where we're not working through the family drug and alcohol court arrangements, and for those families who started on that basis, that continues to the end of the process.
Thank you. You made a statement saying that there weren't suitable judges when you were talking about why the care proceedings, there weren't suitable judges. You didn't mean that there weren't suitable judges, said there weren't enough family court judges, because it just sounded a bit more than there weren't suitable judges. I mean, judges are suitable, but if you made a statement family court judges, then it would have sounded better, because otherwise it could have been anybody.
Yeah, so I apologise. What I meant was that there weren't sufficient numbers of family court judges who could hear the care proceedings cases. I wasn't suggesting that judges were unsuitable.
To me, anyway, I don't know about anybody else, but to me it did stand.
So I apologise. I'm sorry about that.
And also, it's nice to know that the service is sort of embedded in, it seems embedded in the service, and it's going to continue until the summer. CAMS service.
2.18, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, 2.18. So, it's going to be reviewed, future arrangement. I hope the future arrangement leader is going to continue, because I think the service is very good and you find very helpful. So, is it going to be reviewed due to financial arrangements, or is it because of finances, or you're just going to review everything to see whether you need it or not? That's what I want.
So the contract for the CAMS team expires in the summer, and we are reviewing the service as we would do as part of good practice and due diligence before making a decision about what the need is and what we commission going forward. So we haven't reached a decision. We haven't completed the review, so we haven't got an outcome of that review as yet.
Is it likely that you'll continue? That's what I'm wondering. I know you haven't got an outcome yet, but you must have an idea,
so we're
one way or other.
So we're still in the process of reviewing that at the moment. We're not at a point where we can give an outcome because that review hasn't been completed yet.
Doesn't sound good.
I think it's worth clarifying that what we're talking about is the embedded CAMS function in children's social care. That's not the child and adolescent mental health services as a whole right across Merton. It wasn't I didn't think you knew, I just wanted to make sure that all members were clear.
Thank you.
Can I thank you for your report, for the work that you've undertaken in the report. I referred to page 3, 2.16 on the case management system and the data that's been provided. I was just wondering if you could provide more information on the quality of the data and recording practices that you've aired caution on in that last paragraph.
So we have identified within our case management system, which is called Mosaic, that we have some inaccuracies in where placement information has historically been recorded, and we also have inaccuracies in how the report that pulls information out of Mosaic pulls it out. And because of those inaccuracies, which we're currently working with our performance team colleagues and our IT colleagues to understand and untwist and resolve, we are not confident that our placement stability data is accurate, but we're not yet at a position where we can say what we think it is.
Do we know the margin of inaccuracy at this moment? No. Okay. Do we know when that information will be available?
So we have recently secured some additional resource to undertake some repair work of our Mosaic system. We need to recruit some specialist software developers to undertake that work, and they will be able to advise us more clearly about the margins of error, how quickly and how easy it is to put that right so that our reporting is accurate.
And I assume the reports, the more accurate figures will then come back to us once we have that data.
Yes.
Brilliant, thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you. Could you please come up to explain 2.9 a little bit more details for me? Thank you. On page 2.
Yes. So what we're saying there is that children who have become looked after because they have a disability, the numbers of those children have gone down. The numbers of children that we look after because their parents have a disability or unwell has gone up by a small amount.
So are those children looked after within the parents at home, or in care homes because their parents have disabilities? So are they living at home with parents with someone supporting them while they're there?
So this report relates to all children who are looked after in the care of Merton.
Mm-hmm.
So those wouldn't be children who were living at home with their parents with support, because they wouldn't then be looked after by Merton Council.
Is that it? Thank you very much for your question.
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting reading, very positive. As I said, and also Kelly said, and I was commenting, that it's good that you're not satisfied with where you are and you've got to come and improve. So thank you very much indeed, really appreciate it. The next item agenda we're going to move on to is item 8, which is also in your thick booklet, starting at page 67. Which is celebrating success and Elizabeth McKee. It's a lot of information, it's interesting to read, and again, there's a wonderful
Morden?
Again, I have to say it's very good. I'm very happy with what's there. You're looking at how to continually make progress for our schools and our children. So appreciate it.
So this report, as you will see, summarises the achievement of our children, our pupils in Merton schools, also their attendance, their attainment, aspects of inclusion as well. It also summarises the achievement of children in our care, in Merton's care. So that is not just our children who are in our care in Merton schools, but beyond that as well. With the brief summary that I might just sort of highlight that, suggest you look at, and I know your page numbers may be different to the ones that I have in front of you, but I think you can probably see my page numbers down to the left of the pages as well. On my page 3, we have the executive summary, where we talk about the proportion of schools judged to be good or better by Ofsted rose from 93% to 95% of the course of that year, and for all phases that places us above London and national averages. With regards to pupil outcomes, a good level of development, so that's the end of the reception year, outcomes improved by a couple of percentage points, which is stronger than improvements seen nationally. We are now well above the national average there. That has been a good improvement over the years. One area of concern for us is phonics, because we have experienced a drop there. We remain above the national average, but we're just below the London, having been securely above that. So that is an area of development for us. At Key Stage 1, reading and maths performance continues to be strong. We did have a drop in our writing, but that mirrors the trend nationally, and we remain above the national. Our rankings in reading and in maths at that key stage, our national rankings are strong. At Key Stage 2, we have good outcomes both in terms of progress and in terms of attainment, particularly again with regards to reading and mathematics. Writing is again slightly a poorer cousin, if you like, but it remains above the national averages, and our national ranking has improved to 54th. You can see that there's been a 3-year upward trend there. From 102nd 2 years ago, we are now 54th. Key Stage 4 outcomes, 0.55, that Progress 8 score ranks Merton schools 3rd in the country, with some very strong individual performances within that. Key Stage 5, we have the very confusing, perhaps, level 3 qualifications. We've got different kinds of level 3 qualifications. The level 3 qualifications seen together, we have seen a drop, and our national rank has also dropped. Within that, we have had stronger performance in our applied general subjects, and although our A-level outcomes improved, that obviously was not good enough to boost overall outcomes. You've got a paragraph there around pupil groups as well, where we see some varied performance at different key stages with regards to the different groups. I would, in terms of where we continue to see some very positive outcomes, pupils with EHCPs improved their performance in all key stages and are above national averages. And although we've had some drops at SEND support, we remain above national averages. And you can see there what our priorities for improvement are. I would summarise our priorities for improvement before I hand over to Keith just to introduce his part of the report. Is that okay, Chair? I would summarise our priorities for improvement. As you say, we are on a continuous journey of improvement. We are always looking to see where we can do better. Year 1 phonics. We want to continue to improve outcomes in writing, although we, as I'm paid to say, in the primary phase,
above the national average. Key Stage 5 and A levels. Pupil groups, in particular, we want to do some work this year for our Black pupil groups, Black Caribbean pupils, and Black African pupils. And finally, you will know that Ofsted have changed their regime. They will be inspecting, if their consultation goes through, they will be inspecting all outstanding schools next year. So there's a lot of work to be done this year around that. So those are our key priorities going forward. I'll hand over to Keith.
Thank you. So going back to page 4 again. So we're at the bottom of page 4, which is not in education, training and employment, has continued to fall against rising national averages, and we are well below national and well below London, which is very good news. Our about 12th nationally, which is roughly where we were last year. We are our number of young people that are meeting the duty at 16, 17, 18 is also well above. School attendance, we've got again good averages over a number of years in school attendance, where we've seen a rising trend against a national fall in attendance. So our attendance in primary and secondary school is very good. We've seen a fall in attendance in special schools. We targeted persistent absence last year. That has improved very slightly in special schools, but overall attendance in special schools has fallen back slightly. The permanent exclusions, we've continued to have no permanent exclusions in our primary schools. We've seen a significant rise in our permanent exclusions in secondary schools. That's in line with the previous year. So those who've been at this panel before will know that we went from 19 down to 9, up to 21 again. So we've got a 3-year sort of cycle of this. Secondary schools are doing a focused piece of work to look at what that rise is about, and there's more information about that if members are interested in why that's gone up. The fixed term exclusions, which is where children are excluded for a shorter period of time, has fallen in secondary schools, and is now a very good picture from a very high picture a number of years ago, and is a very good situation. We still have relatively high special school fixed term exclusions, but that's on a very small cohort, and therefore the numbers look disproportionate in the way the data works. Those which are electively home educated has continued to rise. We've seen a rise in that as we have nationally in elective home education, so that's been a 13% rise this year, and we've seen that rise over a number of years. And again, if people are interested in the reasons for that, there's a number of reasons which may be behind that, as well as demographic pressure. And then the last section there is about what's called children missing education. So we have a way of tracking children which are not in school, and our legal duty is to track those not in school at all. We also track those which are on school rolls but the attendance isn't good enough, or they're not coming into school. So we've seen some changes in that data this year. Our timeliness was always very, very good, and our timeliness has dropped, but that's partly because we're victims of our own success. Because what we've managed to do is take some children off that panel by getting them into school even faster, which has therefore left the group left on the panel to be the ones that are a bit slower. So our data isn't quite as good as it has been in previous years, but the numbers of children going through that panel have fallen as being off-roll and have increased in those being on-roll, which I see as a good identification picture. So there's some good data in there as well, and some pleasing results.
Questions, please.
Which one to share with? Sorry. It's a great report, really well put together, and I think that in terms of the way that schools perform, they're doing incredibly well. I think my cause for concern is still Key Stage 5, because we did discuss it this time last year. And if you think about it in terms of as children do go through the school education system, Key Stage 1, 2, 3, 4, and then if we're not attaining where we should be at Key Stage 5, then that's kind of where they will actually opt to go into employment or go on to university, and they're not achieving their ultimate best at that point in time, then clearly there must be some failure in that. So I think my concern is, yes, I can see you've identified it, you've mentioned that, but what are we going to be talking about this time next year? Because we didn't talk about it this time last year, and that's my cause for concern.
Yes, indeed, we did talk about it this time last year. A lot of actions went in last year. Schools are engaging well with this. This feels like a more than a year-long project, though. As I said, the A-level results have improved, but they haven't improved as strongly as they need to. The way that the schools have engaged with the actions has been through a project done through the schools partnership, ATTAIN. There has been work done to support teachers in Key Stage 5, improving their subject knowledge and understanding the standards at Key Stage 5. And the leaders across our sixth forms also continue to work together to identify what needs to happen. We want to see that there will be stronger improvements next year, that will place our rankings more in line with at least our London neighbours. It's interesting, London as a whole does not perform as well at Key Stage 5 as well as that. Other key stages, we buck that trend, but in London. So there is a lot of work going on, schools are engaging well.
Yes, thank you very much for the report. Thank you. Exclusions, the rise in exclusions. I'm wondering if you have any more detail about what are these children doing, where are they attending school, and how is it affecting their outcomes? And do you have a breakdown of are these children SEN or are they going on to homeschool or? And also, and then also talking about the homeschool. Sorry, I was asking about that as well. How often are these children checked out? How much often is the information updated to see where they, how education is continuing or how it's affecting their education? And again, a breakdown of who are these children? Are they children that are needing extra attention, or are they why are they coming out of mainstream school? Do you have any data for that?
So I take exclusions first, is that okay? And if I miss out one of your questions, come back and I'll make sure I've got it. So in terms of the permanent exclusions, there was a question there about what we think the rise might be to do with. We're doing an analysis with secondary heads of the 21 permanent exclusions, and we've done a deep dive into 8 of them to read their school files from when they started at nursery all the way through to find any trends or any issues that might have been there in the past about them. That's going to then go to the May secondary heads meeting where we're going to analyse it together with the secondary heads. From the initial analysis, one of the key things is a rise of children bringing weapons into schools, and schools taking a clear line on weapons in schools leading to permanent exclusion. So that's definitely a trend or a factor in that year that was not there in the year before. There was some year before, but there was a rise in that year. So we need to understand what that's about and understand why that might be so. In terms of what then happens to those children, so if you're permanently excluded, you'll then refer, if you're a Merton, this is Merton exclusions from Merton schools, but not Merton residents. So if you're a Merton resident who's permanently excluded, then you will go to the Merton Pupil Referral Unit, which is the Smart Centre, and that will be the education the local authority will offer you. The education at the Smart Centre has been seen as good, it's good quality education, and I think we as an authority are investing in the Smart Centre to ensure the good quality education. There's then a process with secondary schools about whether those children will then return to mainstream, which is called the fair access process. Now, some of the children will then return to mainstream, and some children will stay in the Smart Centre till the end of their time, and they'll finish their GCSEs at the Smart Centre. So their results will be counted from there. It's true to say that nationally there is concern about the outcomes of children permanently excluded, and there are concerns about whether they will attain what they should have attained, so that's a concern. But you are looking at a group of children that, if they stayed in mainstream, already have challenging behaviour. So the benchmark is difficult to compare with, but there is a national concern about the outcomes of children permanently excluded. The groups, you talked about particular groups that sit behind it. So on page 88, there's a fixed term exclusion breakdown of groups, which is secondary school fixed term exclusion, which is a much larger population, where 21 is a small group, small sample. and therefore the figures change quite rapidly in terms of which groups. I can say within the permanent exclusion group there was no one, there was one child with an EHCP within the 2021, but the rest weren't. But in terms of the pupil groups here, what you'll see is broken down, these are fixed term exclusions, broken down by gender, disadvantage, special needs, no special needs, and then the key ethnic groups. You'll see there in all the groups, bar one, which I'll point out in a second, the Merton figure is below that of national and below that of London, so it's a better picture in national and London in terms of our fixed term exclusions. You can see also that the gap between advantage and disadvantage is smaller, so and in some cases it's significantly below. So if you look at something like fixed term exclusions of those which are disadvantaged, which is obviously disproportionate from those that are not disadvantaged, it's about half of what it is nationally. There's still work to go, but it's a very much better picture than it is nationally. Where there are two areas to look at, one is those with SEN with an EHCP, where we're slightly worse than London, or you could say in line with London, 0.01%. So I think we'll say we're in line with London there, but we are better everywhere else, so that's interesting to say we're in line. And you'll see that in terms of Black African pupils, although we're better than national, we're not as good as London in terms of Black African pupils for fixed term exclusions. So it's interesting that that figure is in there, given the comment that Elizabeth made previously about focusing on certain groups of attainment in secondary schools. That's interesting. The numbers are small, but it's still interesting that it's slightly above the others. Is that the exclusion one's done? Yeah. So elective home education, which is on page 92. Several questions of that. One was to do with who the children are. So the children come onto elective home education for a very wide range of reasons. And one of the concerns nationally is that they're coming onto elective home education because they're forced into it by schools. So all schools tell us when they take a child off roll, and we will follow up all those cases, and we have a very thorough process in education welfare of checking all those cases. So we don't have children coming onto our elective home education that we haven't scrutinised or challenged. There are some parents that will say, I don't understand the process, and that's fair. So we've introduced a form where parents sign to say they understand what it means to electively home educate now, and that's been helpful for some parents. In terms of why they come on, I think that's a question I've been asked in previous years, and we've certainly got a mixed picture there. You've got some children that will come onto this because their parents are worried about the children's mental health, and they can't cope in school. We've got some parents where they don't get the school they want, and will actually home educate until they get the school they want. We've got some parents that we will be pressurising about their poor attendance in school, and they will withdraw their children from school as a consequence. So there's a range of factors there which can drive this. I think the other thing which is true is more parents are aware of their rights, and some parents want to educate their children that way because they believe in it. And I think that's also a factor in it, so that more parents are aware that they can really do that. In terms of the question about following up elective home education, we have very limited legal powers to follow up elective home education, but we have quite a robust process in Merton to do that. So it's a combination of my world and Elizabeth's this one, because education welfare, which is under me, we will contact the family, we will explain what they are taking responsibility and what that means, and then we will then visit the family, and then referrals made to Elizabeth's team. Do you want to answer that question?
So I have two advisors who carry out home visits, and at the moment they are visiting about half of electively home educated children at home. They are reviewing the education reports for the other half, so we ask parents to provide us with reports if they do not wish us to visit. Should education not be deemed appropriate, we have to be careful with our language there, because we don't use the Ofsted language, it's appropriate. They are visited on an annual basis, except for in the first year when they are visited twice. If it is deemed not appropriate, we go back every 3 months to look at how things have changed. And our advisors will be making suggestions to parents, trying to work in partnership with them, because some parents will be trying very hard, obviously, to work with their children, but not necessarily, they're struggling somewhat, and so our advisors will be giving advice and support them as well.
So we've seen a drop in the number of parents that will allow us to visit the home, which you might see as a concern, with more of them sending reports in, but only 11 children that were seen or are sent in reports were seen as not appropriate. So it's a very small number in the overall number of those that are educating seen as not appropriate. And of those, if they're not appropriate, if we don't get enough information, we will then ask the parents to name the school, and if they don't, we'll then go down like this, attendance order. We've done a lot less attendance orders this year than previous years. So you can see in the system, I would say probably we're having less families that are not providing appropriate education than previously, even though the numbers are going up.
Thank you very much for the report. It's very good, and I'd like to say I'm very proud of our schools, and I think they're doing wonderful. Thank you all for that. I did have two questions, but speaking to about the exclusion, I do want to know what's happening with the Black, Caribbean, and African children. There seems to be a gap. Are we going back to where we were before, or is it just a blip? You know, we had all that issue where we had to really work hard to bring them up, and they seem to be big, up ahead of them. so I haven't got further. You don't want to cough because people just panic. Or are we sort of going backwards?
I have mentioned the performance of black pupils before in previous years, and where we have tried to focus on it in previous years is by going down the route of working with individual schools, because actually it is in particular schools where the majority of our black pupils are attending. Some of that work has been successful, and we have seen some schools improve their outcomes for black pupils. By highlighting this more as a group now, we want to actually approach it in a different way. We've listened to colleagues from school improvement services across London, and we want to learn from the way that Lambeth have approached this, the way that Haringey have approached this, and actually, because although we say that the majority of our black pupils are in a smaller group of schools, pretty much every school, of course, will have some black pupils in. So there is something that we need to bring everybody together to understand that even though they are small numbers, there are things that we need to do as a community together. So we're planning with schools what that might look like. We've started to engage with our secondary heads, some of the ideas. There have been suggested we could do a conference as a starting point, but then bringing together some toolkits which would be helpful for schools to look at their own practice.
Does it mean that you need to sort of get the parents involved more? And also, are the schools, I think of this carefully, are the schools dealing with the young black pupils in the right way? Are they finding out what the problem is? Are they not sort of prejudging them before they know what the issues are? So maybe all these things are sort of together, and that's why we're having these problems, because we don't really want to go back to where we were before, because we worked so hard to sort of improve stuff.
And I would say we're not going back, absolutely not. This is a renewed focus, looking at things in a different way. Apologies, Agatha, can you repeat the first part of your question? I'm sorry.
We took getting the parents.
Thank you. Yeah, no, parental involvement is absolutely critical. That is one of the things that we know from our own experiences here in Merton and our own professional experiences within the school improvement team, for example, where we've come from across other London boroughs. So part of some of the tools that we'll be sharing with schools will be how they can consider their engagement with parents. I think schools would be at pains to say that they look at each child and they want to be able to engage with each child and their parents to ensure that their needs are met. And I think that's what Merton schools would say. I don't think there is, I don't think schools would want to say that that they are prejudging or anything like that. But part of one of the other tools that we might be suggesting to schools and has been used successfully in Lambeth, for example, is unconscious bias training. And so that might be one of the things that would be in the toolkits as well.
Thank you very much for the reports. I going to refer to page 118 of our pack and page 51 of your report on 4.5.4, where it states that St Mark's Academy and Rains Park High School are both below the national average and London averages and the Merton averages for attainment 8 indicators. So what I wanted to find out was why is that lower than the national average and the Merton average, and what's being done to support those schools in bringing those averages up to our Merton average.
Could I then refer you subsequently to that to 104 in my report, which is where we have the performance tables for Key Stage 4, where you've got a range of indicators for all the schools. As you may have heard me say before, attainment aid is of course important, but of equal if not greater importance is the progress 8 score, because that is about the progress from the starting points.
Yep.
And what you will see is that St Mark's progress 8 score of 0.37 is very strong indeed. It is deemed well above the national average. So although their attainment is below, the progress these children are making is very, very strong indeed. Rains Park High School have also got a positive progress score of 0.02, which would indicate that the children are making, again, that progress from starting points. The situation about our work with both of those schools is slightly different, because obviously St Mark's is an academy. We do have good links with the academy, and so we do have good conversations with them. Rains Park High School is a maintained school, so they are receiving support from one of our Merton education partners, and I know that they will be looking together at how to make that positive progress score even more positive.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to ask about permanent exclusions, and a lot of what I was going to ask about elective home education has been covered. However, the rise, Keith, that 174%, I know you've covered some of it. Would you put an increase on mental health issues in some of that? I've said that. And also, secondly, what support is there for parents as well? Choose that route.
For elective home education, thanks. Yeah. I think the second bit first.
Yeah.
The support for parents. So what we provide is we have an officer who leads on elective home education. She will contact those parents and give them advice about websites and where information can be got to support the education of the children. And then, as we heard, when the advisor goes and speaks to them, they'll give advice to the parents at that point. There are some other groups that we will advise parents of, which are sort of self-help groups between parents. So that's the main advice we'll provide. There's a lot of key working advice as well for individual parents that might move in and out of the process. So there's not just advice about education, it might also be saying they want advice about admissions, because they're saying we've got elective home education for a period of time, we might be coming into a school, so they want advice about that. So there's a lot of that kind of key working advice that's provided as well. I think mental health is definitely a factor in Key Stage 4. I think there's a number of parents that will choose to elective home educate because they feel the pressure of GCSEs, and they will then choose to elective educate at that point. So we've certainly seen a rise in year 10 and 11 elective home education for that reason. But the big rise is also in primary schools, and I don't think that's particularly related to mental health. I think that is related to a number of other factors, like I said earlier.
Thank you.
Dennis.
Thank you, Chair. Keith has answered my question about head teachers looking at the drivers for the increase in exclusions, but are there any idea when those conclusions are going to come up?
So we're meeting in May. We have a monthly meeting with head teachers. There's not one in April because it's the Easter, but the next one's in May. We've done the meeting to look at the 8 case files, and we've read those together with a group of us. We had the head teacher of the Smart Centre with 3 of my staff, and we read through the files and we came to some conclusions about that. And then we've done the analysis of the 20 ones. We'll bring those in as well. I suppose following up, it's not been discussed by heads yet, but I think it's worth me saying this. It follows a bit of a comment that was made earlier. One of the areas which is of interest is early help. and we've obviously got a shifting new process around early help, which will be developed over the summer term here in Merton, and I think that will be very timely to look at how effective our early help processes are, particularly looking at engagement with families where the child is challenging in school. So how effective our process of supporting that parent, bringing that parent in, and then working alongside that parent to help them with the child who's already challenging in school. I think that's something which the heads have already identified they want to look at, because that's obviously a point of confrontation when you're already saying to a parent your child is not behaving well in school. So how do we do that better to make that more effective so it doesn't escalate and de-escalate?
Thank you, Chair. Just a relatively minor point, but could you confirm that the typos in this document, where it says that the percentage of schools judged to be good or better raised from 83 to 95, as opposed to the report where it says 93 to 95, but also on page 19 of your pack, page 86 of mine, I'm just looking at the table in the top left-hand corner. It suggests that that percentage was actually 91 in 2018, which would be, according to this, below the London average, whereas we're saying elsewhere in the report it's 93, or am I reading that incorrectly?
So apologies for the, because it is a typo in the cover sheet, it is 93 to 95%. In terms of the table top left of that you were referring to, Ofsted changed their methodology. Yes, so that would be behind those differences. Joan?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I apologise. Good job, I looked it up, I was just getting going.
Okay, thank you for reporting. And I must say thanks for all the hard work you've been doing. I know that there are lots of pressure and hard work put into our children in the borough. However, I am very concerned about the amount of young people, especially young men, who are, excluded from mainstream school, especially secondary schools, are in smart centres. As you may realise, that some of the smart centres, they only need 2 or 3 days per week their programs are run. But what I'm thinking, if there could be something more intense happen, because I remember 20 years ago, some of the schools, when the student reaches the age of 17 and they are not settled in mainstream school, then they go into skill training, for example, mechanic or maybe hairdressing or something of your choice. Because you touched on African Caribbean, of course, and also some of the young people who are struggling, they are from like in a company minors. They come here with an aim to work and send money back home for their parents. I mean, I was at the Home Office a few weeks ago, accompanied someone, and this was a 16-year-old child saying, "Well, I'm here to work to send money back home for my family." So therefore, when they reach a certain age in school, they want to get out of school to go and find work, and because of that, sometimes I don't know if they mechanically disturb the class, so they have to move out. But how can you support those children who cannot maintain staying in a mainstream school to get into a training that they can, develop some skills? I know it may be a difficult task to do, but maybe something we may need to look into, because a lot of money have been spent in Merton where our children are concerned, and I know for a fact, because I know there's a lot of money spent in the youth centre, but are we spending the money in the right way?
There's various things in what you said. So in terms of vocational education, I think it's interesting that I think if our secondary head was here now, they'd probably say that there is less vocational education in Key Stage 4 than there used to be. And that's been a curriculum shift over time. So I think, but there is then that vocational education in Key Stage 5. So our largest educator in Key Stage 5 is St Thomas College, Merton campus. So an awful lot of our young people will go there for vocational courses and do very well. So there's lots of vocational options there. And you'll see from our NEET figures being very low, the number of young people that are therefore in post-16 education, and lots of those people are not doing straight A levels, they're doing vocational courses. You specifically mentioned about asylum seekers. So one of the things that we've done lots of work in this last year about particular target groups within our need. I said overall that the number of young people that are not in education training employment is low, but the target groups are those which are more vulnerable, which might be those which have a CND, it might be those which are care experienced, or it might be those which are previously offenders. So they're groups we will target and do work with. And some of those groups are not allowed to work, and that's part of the issue for them. So the asylum seeker group, I understand, many of them are not allowed to work. So they want to work and they want to earn money, but they're not allowed to do it. So it's about getting them to do education programs, and it's true, some of them have done them, are fed up with doing education programs, and they want to work. They've done several of them and they're still waiting. So that is problematic in the figures about those which don't wish to stay in education, they want to work. We have a lot of work programs, which I think you've heard of before here, where we're doing work with young people to get them into job opportunities. And lots of employers are very positive about working with our young people. So we have lots of opportunities here. We had a recent one which was about becoming a lorry driver. So you can't get enough lorry drivers. So young people are being offered full training to be a lorry driver. And then you get your qualification, and that's all free. And this is the stuff which our local employers are offering, which is wonderful opportunities for our young people. There was a recent event which we had in Council Chamber where we had 40 young people come in to talk to employers about the opportunities available for them. So there are lots of opportunities available and lots of linking with those young people to get them into things, and then mainly from those target groups of young people I mentioned. So that's a very effective project to get them into that vocational work we talked about.
James.
Thank you, Chair. So it is, as others have said, it's a really excellent and fantastic report. So congratulations to the Director and our whole team. And I've said before that I think Merton's very lucky to have these two officers here, and I really think the borough's very lucky to have you both. It is a really good report, and I particularly like the fact that where there are issues, they're dealt with. I mean, as our role in scrutiny, to a certain extent, you've done that for us. You've set out priorities, you've set out the actions to be taken, you've set out the impact. I mean, that as councillors, we can't ask anything more of the professional team but to do what you've done. There are always issues, and we've been through those issues tonight. The question I wanted to ask is, or the point I wanted to make is the one I've made before, which is, so what's next? I mean, there's been huge success here, and at the end of the day, although I've credited the two of you and said how lucky we are as a borough, I mean, the Director, it's your team ultimately, and you guys are the political leaders of that team. But to me, any success is always vulnerable. And I do think as a borough, and particularly as political leaders, you need to be asking yourselves, we all need to be asking ourselves, so what's next? Because eventually these two officers will move on. I mean, I hope not for many, many years, but eventually. I do feel we need to do more work to embed what we've got, which is amazing. And I've talked before about, and I've challenged you both. If I asked you what were the 5 things that underlie our success, could you answer? That I'm not going to ask you now. And I think as a borough, we need to make sure we're identifying what's driving that success. And then, so that's point 1. Point 2 is that I would hope, and there is a council meeting about education coming up, but I would hope that as political leaders, you will now set that agenda for how are you going to be even better? How are you going to push your officer team even more? And how do we reach number 3 in terms of improvement is just unbelievable. It's a fantastic result. But then as political leaders, you now need to be saying, so what is the roadmap to being number 1? And if we do that, we're getting the best out of our officer team, number 1. And number 2, we're going to attract fantastic recruitment. The recruitment in the future will be fantastic because everybody will want to come and work in Merton. And I do think that whilst this is amazing and really congratulations to everybody involved, I think I would urge that we do further work on embedding and what's next. That would be my comment. But Chair, I mean, clearly a really amazing report tonight. Thank you.
Just accepting that praise. Obviously, as we said before, that you are thinking of how to mention yes.
What we do emphasise in this report is the partnership work with schools. And I just want to really underline that that the work that our schools do together, partly through the formal partnership of Attain and through the clusters, is incredibly important, and I think is a lot behind a lot of what they do to succeed, because they're sharing good practice, they are driving each other forward, and I think that the more that we are able to empower our schools to continue to do that work together, to learn from each other and learn from external influences, research, that is particularly important in my view, just to mention that.
Chair, can I just respond to that briefly? I agree, of course, and we're very lucky with the teachers we've got, the head teachers we've got whatever it is, 1,500 adults working in schools, 25,000 children, there or thereabouts, and so I agree with you 100% in what you're saying. But it doesn't actually change what I'm saying, which is the leadership needs to come from here. And if the results were the opposite, then I would be saying to yourselves, to the director, and to the cabinet members, well, what's going wrong here? So I do think we need to press on. One thought I did have is whether it's helpful in these sorts of reports to have more historic data, so we can have a clear idea of the trends. Maybe it's not even a suggestion, it's just a thought. And also whether now we've reached the levels we have in most cases, whether we should be looking to challenge ourselves not only by looking at national and London averages, but should we be specifically finding boroughs with a similar population, similar demographic and similar budget, and actually comparing ourselves to those. And we may find in doing that, we may find that we get a few shocks, but then that's part of moving on to the next stage, isn't it? So it's just their thoughts, not suggestions. Thank you, Chair.
No, I want to move on. So just because we are looking at our statistical neighbours, and that is where the orange and the red in this report particularly sits. So if you look on page, so comment about that is where the challenge lies. That is where we're looking, and it is quite interesting where our national rankings are strong, but we continue to be in maybe the third or even the fourth quartile in comparison with our outer London neighbours or our statistical neighbours. That is the real challenge, because we are within a group of high-performing boroughs and of similar boroughs. Our similar boroughs, similar to ourselves, are also high-performing. So there are some things for us to learn.
I do read our reports, but I confess I hadn't spotted this. I should have done. And this is great because this is the basis of the next steps we're talking about. Thank you.
Yes, if I may, I just wanted to draw members' attention to a part of the report which hasn't generated any discussion this evening, which is fine. But I nevertheless wanted to, I suppose, exercise some advocacy, which it's page 65 of the report, page 132 in your packs. It's chapter 5, and it's the achievement of pupils in the virtual school. And the reason why I wanted to raise it is because, as well as being scrutineers around this table tonight, all councillors are corporate parents. The children in the virtual school are children in the care of this local authority, so they are our children, and we are their sharp-elbowed mums and dads, and we are fighting and advocating for a high-quality education for every single one of them. So it's a good chapter, it's a strong chapter, and it speaks well of the work that the virtual school does to support these children. But as corporate parents, I really do want to emphasise that to you and ask you to give that your full attention, because these are our boys and girls.
Thank you. We've still got 3 people to speak, and we have considerably gone over our time, so if you could keep your questions very succinct, that would be appreciated. Thank you, Jen.
Yeah, just a quick remark on the performance tables. Just a note that Ashland is a girls' school, and they have all the top schools. Yes, the boys can catch up. And just back to James' remark about exclusions and AP smart centres. Do we have any attainment figures for those? And do we have any regular updates of them? There's nothing in the report about those at all, I don't think.
The achievement of pupils in the smart centre, we do. With regards to sort of say, let's say traditional measures, they don't do so well. So if you were to give them an attainment aid school, like the cohort who just left year 11, it would not look strong. So what the Smart Centre does is it captures achievement by looking at lots of other different schools. And it is hard to sort of put that into a report like this where we are looking at more national. But the Smart Centre was inspected just over a year ago, less than a year ago, and was found was found to be good. So that's where Ofsted would have looked at those outcomes and seen them to be good.
And very specifically about one thing that is reported nationally and can be compared is all crew attendance is reported nationally, and the Smart Centre has got attendance above national guideline.
Yes, thank you. I know we've got SEN in all the schools, and that's what I've been finding out. I know we have resources issues. Can you really update us on what we're going to do to support the schools or to support the children with SEN? I thought I can catch you on that one.
That's huge, and so the answer is it depends. So it depends on the children's needs and at what level those needs are. So some of the work is being done with the schools, with the mainstream schools, supporting them to work well with children with additional needs within mainstream. Some of the work that we're doing is with our special schools and including expansion in our special schools to create additional places for those young people. We have an SEN forum. We have a special SEN lead within the school improvement team, and Elizabeth may want to say a bit more about Nick's role and the support that he offers to schools. But in principle, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that the school's own funding, which is passed directly to the schools, is used appropriately to support the children with additional needs in their pupil numbers, and that where we have funding, which we commit through education, health and care plans, that is very specifically addressing the additional needs that the children display. So, as I know you know, we had our inspection of the local area inspection of our SEND provision last summer, and although there were some challenges to us around the quality of our education, health and care plans, particularly health input into those, what that inspection did identify was that our identification of children's additional needs was strong, and also the outcomes for children with additional needs in the borough are strong. So although I don't think we would ever be complacent about the work that we're doing to support those young people, what we can demonstrate is we pick up children's additional needs well, and that in terms of the outcomes against their comparators, those are pretty strong. Elizabeth, do you want to add anything about Nick and his role?
So yes, we have Nick Fletcher is our SEN inspector within the school improvement team. He's doing a lot of work with schools. Our SENCO forum that Rachel alluded to is incredibly well attended. The Chaucer Centre main hall is absolutely full to blessing, and that is not just from our maintained schools, but also from some of our independent schools because of our work with our responsibility for SEND, not just in maintained schools. So just to give a flavour of some of the things that he'll be talking to schools about, there's a project called Measuring What Matters. So again, because our children with special educational needs may not be achieving at national averages, for example, it's to capture their achievements in other ways, particularly related to their special educational needs. Although our identification centres seem to be strong in inspection, there is more work to be done with our schools around there to do that. Moderating outcomes, supporting schools with reviews of their SEN, also linked to budget, and support for our ARPs, our additional resource provisions.
So in other words, you've got everything in hand.
We're working hard.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep this very quick. Because I asked first, I did have other questions, but I wanted to see if everybody else answered the mainly they did do. So I do have one outstanding one, and that was on page 83, which is section 2.45. And you mentioned that 19 schools were engaged in the peer review process. And I do recognise that obviously, you did talk about working in partnership and, in terms of what are there 19 schools that you have cause for concerns about, or is that about, is that half and half, and then you've got a few that are, and then the ones which are performing better are the peers? Or I just wonder if you could just enlighten us a little bit more on that. And furthermore, as well, just secondly, Keith, you mentioned when you spoke for these asked questions, because of all of the discussion that we've had on exclusions and homeschooling, you did mention when you spoke at the beginning, if people would like to set their eyes on more information on those two areas, then let you know. So maybe that might be a good idea for this forum for people to see more information if you have that available to you.
So to answer a question around peer reviews. Peer reviews started just over 2 years ago. It was very much it came from the schools themselves. They wanted to develop again that peer challenge and that peer support. Smart started with a very small number of schools. It started with 3, and we are now up to 19. There is a guide present for each of the reviews, so that's a member of my team. I do some of those reviews as well, but they are not chosen by us. They are self-chosen. And so this is schools themselves identifying how they want to look at each other's practice. So there is no pairing up of, for example, outstanding schools with good schools or anything like that. We work on the basis that there is something that we can learn from each other, whatever the Ofsted judgment.
And in terms of the children missing education section in here, is part of a much broader report which Carl's been introducing. Smart that point, which gets produced slightly later in the year, which has more analysis around later education and more analysis around CME. That's where the rest of that goes to.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. We've been on this topic for this part of an hour, so I think we need to call it a close. Thank you very much for very interesting and challenging questions. And I think it is important to remember, though we had specific questions, rightly so, about black boys not achieving. We also get some who do really achieve, but that doesn't come through in this, which is a bit unfortunate. But whether you, well, I'm sure you do use the strategies that perhaps work to them to develop with those that aren't achieving as well as you like. But I think the questions asked were very thorough and really scrutinising the report very well. So thank you very much indeed. And both to Elizabeth and to Keith, thank you. Good night to you both. And we'll go back to the agenda and we'll go on to the agenda item 4, which is the Children's Mental Health Trust Group. And that was moved before. It's on page 13 of your Simmer book. And as Jamie shows,
Yes, I'll just give a brief introduction to this because you will recall, I think, the outcomes of the task group review of children's mental health and a series of recommendations that were made as a result of that. Those recommendations link back to a number of different organisations with responsibility for taking them forward. So this panel itself, obviously the Children's Schools and Families Department, but also Merton Clinical Commissioning Group, GP's Practices, CAMS, which is the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service, and so forth, school governing bodies as well. So in relation to each of these recommendations, what the report now has before you is the actions proposed to try and meet those recommendations, the lead officers assigned to those actions and when we would expect them to be completed. Now, as part of the pre-meet that we hold for scrutiny and as a result of discussion with both Sally and Hayley, I've been asked to clarify some points in relation to recommendations 5 and 7. And this is because both of those recommendations are asking us to ensure provision of training in the first instance to anyone working with young people and in the second instance to every parent in Merton. And the actions that have been put in this table will not achieve those stated objectives. And so I was asked to be clearer about that. So what the actions are in the table are what we think we can deliver as a service or commission as services based on the resources that we've got and the time available, and what that reach is likely to be. So as a for example, under recommendation 5, we say that further training will be scheduled based on need. So that's an indication, I guess, that we're not going to be able to cover everyone, but the feedback to me was that was insufficiently explicit and clear in that report, and I'd like to make that clear to members. So what you've got in front of you is basically the framework against which you will no doubt hold us to account over the coming year, in response to the task force's recommendations. And as I say, a slight clarification on those 2 recommendations, which is that we can't reach everyone that I think the task force would have wanted us to, but we'll have a good try.
Are there any questions for Rachel? Russell?
I've got one. Just could you tell me what Couth online counselling is?
Yeah, Couth is just the name, which I've taken to be a bit of a wordplay. I mean, it may not be at all, but my dad used to always talk about wanting us to be couth as opposed to uncouth. And so I wonder whether it's a play on words like that, although the spelling, of course, is different. But literally, that's just the brand name, and then the rest of it does what it says on the tin. It's an online arrangement which allows young people to receive counselling for their mental health difficulties. And what we're finding, I don't know whether every generation would welcome online counselling, but what we're finding is that the online route is very accessible to young people, and they like using it. So it's a positive offer.
Thank you, Jed. Well, it's just a quick one, really. But recommendation 1 in terms of early years supporting postnatal attachment strategies. Presumably, the task group felt that they needed to be looked at because there were some challenges there. Is that something that you would agree with? I mean, is that something we should look at?
Well, I think it's certainly something that we should bring to the consideration of the coming year's work programme, yes. I mean, we know that we have a number of other suggested recommendations, and we know that although we like to be ambitious, we can't necessarily always manage everything that's on the list, but I would expect that to be one of the things put forward and subject to all panel members' views, and it may be something that we do work on.
Thank you. Is there anyone else?
No, we did go through it very thoroughly to try and clarify and look at what was realistic. And some of it isn't, but it's not saying it's not going to be considered. Okay, thank you. We move on to the departmental update, which is on page 5 in your thin booklet.
That's me again. This is a very thin one this time, and that's because this scrutiny meeting is so hard on the heels of one just last month. The format is the same as previously, so for every team and service area in the directorate, plus the commissioning team as well, which of course I share with Public Health. We have got them all still listed here. For those where there has been quite a lot of activity since last time, we have a full update, but you'll see, for example, under MASH and First Response, and once again under Permanency Looked After Children and a couple of other places in the report, there's no update this time. It doesn't mean that there's no work at all happening in those parts of the directorate. It simply means that there's been nothing that kind of would sound very different from the last time we reported. The only thing that I suppose I would want to change in relation to that is at 213 on page 7 in your packs, under the Permanency Looked After Children Access to Resources team, we said no update provided at this time, and this was true at the time that the report was submitted, but since the date of submission we have held our first ever annual foster carers conference, and that was a tremendous success. So that was just last week, Thursday last week. We focused on the subject of trauma. So young people who come into our care are highly likely to have been traumatised by their life experiences. They will, at the very least, have been separated by their family, from their family. That's what coming into care means. In some cases, they may have been traumatised by their pre-birth experience, if drugs and substance misuse form part of the life of their mother in that gestation period, and some of them may have experienced abuse and neglect. Children who have been in our care for some time may also have experienced more than one placement, and that separation is itself very harmful, even while we're doing the best that we can to provide good care. What we know is that when children are traumatised, it affects their behaviour. And in a sense, the children who need our love and care the most may sometimes behave in ways that make it really difficult for them to receive that love and care. And so that behaviour impacts on their ability to stay in a good placement. The more that foster carers understand about trauma and how that leads to children's behaviour, the better able they are to cope with that. And we also know that foster carers themselves can be traumatised by the impacts of children's unsettled and upset behaviour in their care, and so we have a requirement both to help foster carers understand the impact of trauma on the children they look after, but also the impact of primary, secondary and vicarious trauma on themselves. So that was the focus of the whole event. We were rammed. We had not enough space at the tables. We had to get a whole set of extra chairs out of the back of the room at the Chaucer Centre. People were really appreciative of it. There was some great networking because our foster care network supports each other very well, but there was also some really good professional input from our in-house CAMS team, and every session was done by a member of the CAMS team staff alongside an experienced foster carer talking about their own experience. So we super feedback. I had the opportunity to introduce the conference, and I made I put real emphasis on the words first and annual to make the point that this was the first of many, and that they could expect another one next year. So
that's excellent news. Thank you very much. Any questions, Dennis?
Thank you, Chair. I've got two really. Points 2.8, 2.9. There's about 2 new agency social workers in Team 1. And at the bottom it says 2.9, it's a rolling programme of advertising. Well, this is an ingrained problem as far as I know, going back 20 years in my experience. What is the likelihood? Because, as we all know, resources are always stretched. What's the likelihood of that actually coming to fruition where we have more on roll, if you like, social carers? And the second thing was just basically a comment. I remember about 15, 16 years ago, taking up your point about the foster carers being on the fostering panel. And it's the most, a long time ago, 15, 16, I thought it was the most distressing thing I ever did, reading some of those cases and some of those kids. I'm surprised they stayed sane if they did. And trying, back in those days, to get foster carers was much more difficult than it is now. And what made it even worse, 1 or 2 of the cases where the foster care placement had broken down and the children had to come back in, it was absolutely, well, I'm not a crier, but 1 or 2 of them made me want to cry at what those kids have been through. Anyway, question and that.
So I think I would be astonished to reach a stage where Merton had absolutely no agency social workers at all. I think that's partly a reflection of the market, the jobs market for children and family social workers, and partly a reflection of where Merton is. So it's a London borough. It's very easy to get to near neighbours. The transport links are terrific. You can decide to work somewhere else very quickly. So if I compare us with some places where I know they have no agency social workers, East Sussex would be one, bounded on most sides by the sea, and very large. And so it takes quite a while to not work in East Sussex if you live there. You have to go a long way. Another place, similarly, is North Yorkshire, and again, no agency social workers, and again, very big. So you can get lots of movement before you need to go somewhere else. So I would be astonished if we got down to 0, but we do have other London boroughs which have in the low single figures of agency social workers, and so that's our aspiration, is to get down that low. We currently have the lowest level of agency workers that we've had for some years, and so although there is still turnover, and we quite often find there's turnover in the agency workers, so we've got a good solid body of permanent staff who largely stay with us. And then we've got quite a lot of churn in the agency workers. We're trying to slow that down all the time and make efforts, obviously, to convert them to permanent. But it's one of those roles where you absolutely can't leave an empty chair. So we'll always, in order to manage caseloads, in order to make sure that children see someone, we will take an agency social worker rather than leaving a space vacant. And then just in relation to your comment, I absolutely agree. It can be extremely difficult. That's why the trauma work is so important. And I am a crier, so you can imagine what state I'm in sometimes.
Thank you, James.
Thank you, Chair. It was only just the observation. I thought 2.14, 2.15 about auditing and the monthly auditing and review of practice, etc. I just thought that was really good, both really good, and what feeds into some of the other things we've said tonight in the previous meetings. So thank you.
I just want to say, on the trauma conference, having been a foster carer in the past myself, and I went to one about 6 months ago in London, and it was. I just want to say how strong it is for people to do understand and realize what we are going through. I said me because I separated from my parents when I was very young. I wasn't in care of my grandparents, but for children who are coming in care, somebody who they don't know, they never seen in their life, and the distance they have to travel to, and sometimes it's you find authorities fail to support foster carers with information so they can work with those children because of different legalities, and sometimes children end up lost out on the care that they're supposed to get because foster carers don't know what they're going through. They have nothing to work on. So I just want to say, how grateful I am that we start to look into, how to support foster carers more and our young people more. Because, a lot of young people out there, they go through hell and they suffer a lot. And sometimes you wonder why we have so many crime on the street. And, who would you blame for it? Not some of these children. We are the corporate parents. Thanks.
Actually, it's worth saying, because you've mentioned being in the care of a grandparent, that as well as foster carers at this event, we also invited kinship carers and special guardians. So children who are in the care of their extended family, or children who were now in a permanent family on a special guardianship order.
Page 9, talking about speech and language service. I know we had a discussion at one of the schools about this. It does say here that you're going to recruit some therapists. Is that how many more? Will that help the school that we went to? Is this for special schools?
There's two things there. So one is vacancies in the service. So this is not additionality. It's just filling places that we've had vacant for some time. And then there is support around the new ASD base at Stanford. I can't tell you off the top of my head what that adds up to in full-time equivalent, so I would need to take that question back.
Still looking at more.
So for speech and language therapy, that's not funded from the general fund, that's funded from the dedicated schools grant. So as you know, we're significantly overspent in the DSG at the moment. We always look at how we can deploy that to best advantage, and if we're in a position to get more speech and language therapists, then I think we will. There's a twofold challenge. One is affording them, and the other is recruiting them, because it's a very challenging area to recruit to.
I just wanted to say thank you for the conference, actually, because I know a few of the foster parents who were quite pleased to have it. They were very, felt it was a good thing, and they're very pleased to know there'll be another one next year, because they actually do need support. I mean, like Dennis, I was on the foster carers panel and the adoption panel. It is stressful. I mean, you just got to try your best and do what you can. And I think things have changed, because the time for people to apply to be foster carers or adopted parents has got smaller. Because it used to be so long with the training and the investigations went on. And half the time people got fed up and decided not to do it. So I think things are improving. And it's a thorough check, so the time's got shorter. So thanks.
Not on your report, but are you getting any feedback from schools about the relationship in sex education that's supposed to start in September? Are we going to be in a Birmingham situation?
We haven't had feedback to that effect yet. It's a shame actually that this question didn't come while Elizabeth was still here, because she might have had a bit more than would have reached me. So I will also take that question back. I don't think we would expect to be in a Birmingham situation, although I can't rule it out. But we're supporting our schools with the implementation of the requirement, and so we'll certainly hear if there are any challenges, and we'll bring them back here if there are.
Thank you. Are there any more questions?
St. Mark's, I've got a few parents, Muslim parents, and what we do is when they're not happy with anything, make sure they have a meeting with the head, or there's another group of another Muslim that speaks to them. We had that with the sex education, so we had a meeting, and they saw the video first, and then so I think some of the schools might work that way. I think that's the way.
James.
Chair, thank you. It's just a brief question. I'm conscious it's a public meeting, so I'm not sure what the director wants to update us on this evening. But I wonder, just given it's not in your report, but given the issues around coronavirus, whether as far as it's appropriate tonight, whether you just give us a very quick briefing on actions that you're taking to safeguard your kids in schools and your team.
Sure. So we're very well supported. I think every local authority in the country is very well supported by clear communications from central government on this issue about what they're doing, what they're expecting at a national level. So we have daily communication from the Department for Education, and in some cases additional other government departments as well. So, for example, the Foreign Office was part of the update today, including travel advice. We are required to forward that information to schools and other settings, including early years providers, and we support that information from central government with our own local availability of public health advisors and the comms team. So the two key things at this point in time really are the public health advice to schools, depending on their local circumstances, and then also comms when they're making decisions, or they have some important message to convey to parents. As things currently stand, the advice from Public Health England and the clear steer from the DfE is that schools should not close on a precautionary basis. So unless there's a confirmed case in a school and Public Health England's advice is that the school needs to close, schools should stay open. We had the situation, as everyone I think is aware of, at Wimbledon College, which was closed because there was a confirmed case at the school, and the contact and tracing work that Public Health England did meant the number of staff that had to self-isolate meant the school couldn't be operational while that number of people were out of the school. So every single case, as it stands, is followed up by Public Health England, and the advice given will vary depending on what the contact tracing says. So basically, we are following Public Health England advice, forwarding all of the information from central government, particularly from the DfE, and we are supporting individual schools with their inquiries through public health colleagues, myself and the education division colleagues, and comms. Matt Burrows in comms has been terrific. Mike Robinson in public health has been terrific in support of our schools. And the last thing I suppose I would say is that it's really clear from central government that as the situation changes, the advice will change. So that's why the daily updates are so important. And if and when the position changes and the advice changes, we will make sure that that's communicated to schools really promptly, and that we will support them once again in conveying those fresh messages to parents.
Thank you. And I'm not sure whether I got it as a councillor or a member of this panel or a chair of governors, but I did get a couple of daily briefings from your office, and I found them really helpful. So, I mean, I appreciate there's no point doing them every single day, but I'm not sure how I qualified to be on the list, but I was pleased to be on the list. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Would you be kind enough to explain page 8, 2.3, your last sentence, we recognize our strength, but also areas we want to and need to develop further. What are those areas, please?
So they come out of the individual partnership learning reviews and things that we commission. So some of the work that we're doing currently is around what Elle described earlier as contextual harms, which is where children are at risk because of circumstances outside their family. So this is things like criminal exploitation and sexual exploitation. So our learning reviews are looking at some work around that. There's another learning review looking around the well-being of children with mental health difficulties, self-harm and suicidal ideation. So it's specific niche areas of development that come out of those kind of learning reviews.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We're going to Captain's priorities. I'll remind you of 10 minutes. And as I go first last time, Kelly, would you like to go first this time? So.
Thank you. Not that I wish to use up my full 10 minutes, but is that 10 minutes each or 10 minutes between us?
10 minutes between you.
Fine. I assume so. Thank you. I'll speak very quickly like I did last time. So, firstly, I have quite a positive update on user voice and participation, in that it has been chosen as the theme for the Merton Partnership Annual Conference, which is happening at the end of the month. So the theme is listening to and involving young people, and we will have introductions from Rachel on what is good participation, Dagmar, who's the Director of Public Health, on what is the story about young people in Merton, focusing on things like the Start Well priorities within the Health and Wellbeing Board. And then Andrew Murray, who is the soon-to-be not chair of Merton Clinical Commissioning Group, looking at the mental health trailblazer as an example of partnership good practice. There'll also be workshops, so we can deep dive into different participation aspects. So there will be one on young people's leadership for Healthy Place, which will examine the role of young people as current and future leaders of a healthy place in Merton. Hearing about best practice, including the Young Inspectors Programme and young people's involvement in the commissioning of holistic services. So that's really looking at how we creatively involve young people and strengthen their participation. Safer and stronger communities, building on what Rachel was saying about contextual safeguarding. So we'll be looking at the responsive community engagement team who've delivered a range of early intervention projects working proactively with young people and communities in hotspot areas to reduce those risks to adolescents in the borough. And we'll also be launching the new Merton Special Educational Needs and Disability Strategy with an opportunity to hear directly from young people about their experiences growing up in Merton and looking at how partners can contribute to supporting those children and young people to feel part of their community, build relationships and friendships with their peers. And lastly, we're focusing on built environment with a sustainable communities and transport workshop, which are looking at how young people have actively engaged in tackling climate change in the borough, including helping develop the new climate action plan and the commitments of the Youth Parliament in addressing climate change. And then looking at structure and performance, we've recently had sort of a handover meeting between the Safeguarding Children Partnership, where we have a new structure and a new chair. So I'll be meeting with the new chair soon in order to discuss what the transitional arrangements will be like now that he is in place, and looking at priorities for the partnership so we can build on the good work that we have attained so far and not let things slide on under any new leadership. And then tomorrow there is a meeting following some design council work about domestic violence, and I'm sure you'll all have heard us talk about the effect that domestic violence can have on young people in the borough. So that will be looking at things like perpetrator work and community responses. So how do we build in a community response to domestic violence? What can we be doing? What can businesses be doing in order to identify and encourage DV reporting? And hopefully that will be a really good meeting that I can feed back at the next panel. Thanks.
Has anyone got any quick questions?
Thank you, very nice. When will this meeting be held and where? Is it open meeting or is it just a closed meeting?
Which one? The domestic violence one? I believe it's for partners of the Violence Against Women and Girls meeting, so it'll be tomorrow, but it is a closed group, I believe.
And the rest that you mentioned,
yeah.
When will they be?
So the partnership annual conference is on the 31st of March. I think it might be fully subscribed now. I know that I was slow in RSVPing myself and they had to hold me a place, which I'm very grateful for. But yes, I think that one's fully attended now. But I'm sure that we can feed back on the learnings from it.
Thank you very much. Ellie.
I get told off by Sally if I speak too quickly, so I'll try and just be brief rather than quick. I mean, we've had the school standards report here tonight, which lays out a lot of the issues that I would have raised anyway. And I suppose my focus is making sure that the priorities that are picked up there are the ones that are followed through. And as Elizabeth was saying, often that involves working with individual schools, and I'm still going around and speaking to individual schools and hearing about their own challenges. And so I'll be feeding back to officers about, well, where are there alignment between our borough priorities and those of schools, and where are there differences, and how do we make sure we support those. But you'll have seen that one of the priorities that comes through across all the phases is the focus on gaps in performance between different groups, which is something that we've got strong political leadership on as well. So we're focusing more on that. And I think it was interesting, Jade, your point about us needing to sing our praises more and know what we're doing better. I think that's true. And I think particularly given that if you do speak to schools, they do say that recruitment and retention is still an issue for teachers, and we do need to talk up what it is that Merton are doing for schools. recruitment intentions is an issue for schools, and we need to make it easier for them to talk about why teaching in Merton is such a great pleasure. The second main area that I'm still focusing on is SEND. So the budget thankfully gave us some more money for some additional resources to help support the SEND work, some more case officers and more ed sites. So then now we're going to be moving on to the putting that in place and implementing that. It also had savings that we've also got to put in place and implement. That over the coming months is going to be putting that in train. And in order to help deliver on our recovery strategy for the dedicated schools grant, we need to increase our places. So work is underway on what that looks like. And on the third one, the coronavirus has been raised, and that's been causing a lot of consternation and thinking, as you can imagine. Rachel talked about the immediate work that's going on, and also some of the thinking that's starting to happen is about, well, if we do have to move to any further shutdown, what more could we and should we be doing to make sure that the most vulnerable that we're supporting are at more risk due to any shutdown?
Thank you very much. Has anyone got questions for Amy? Okay. Thank you both very much. It's very clear, and that's important. I made my little notes, so thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Right, and we're coming now to agenda item 9, which is on page 21 of the thinner booklet. And I've got a few of these sheets, anyone wants some forms indicating so we actually give you one of So I want to say thank you very much for bringing the page to the end. So if for page 21, again, it's really interesting what you collated. It's only a month, but if there's anything you'd like to particularly draw to our attention before there are any questions.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the regular performance update you have in front of you. And I can report that there haven't been a change since last month, as you, as is good news really, and was in many ways to be expected. The report follows its usual format in terms of a short section on exception reporting, so any indicators that we have a particular concern about, or where we are providing kind of further information. So I'd like to draw the Scrutiny panel members' attention to 2.3's indicator 11, which is the children who became subject to child protection plan for the second or subsequent time. What you have in the paragraph 2.5 through to 2.6 is service commentary, which outlines, I think, in detail and hopefully provides assurance around the actions that we have taken as a service to review each and every individual child who has come to our attention for the second or subsequent time. I'm now going to hand out some additional information. So similar to the care proceedings, there's some further information that I'd like to highlight to panel members as well, which provides maybe a slightly more mundane numerical explanation for this slight increase in the percentage, with some further assurances about the absolute numbers. So I'll hand these out now, and we'll talk to them. Just hand this way. There are more. Yeah. So both the it's worth saying both the care proceedings, additional information that was handed out today, as well as this, will go out with the minutes. Make sure you get that. So, in addition to the assurances provided by the service and the clear social work grip that is demonstrated in 2.4 to 2.6, I just wanted to highlight some contextual background in terms of the figures. So, what I really want to be showing is the significant decline in the numbers of children who are open to child protection plans. So, this is the first graph you have in front of you, so you can see that from a high in February. April 18 and February 19 down to February 2020, there's been a reduction almost by half in the numbers of children open to child protection plan, which means, and there's also been a corresponding decline in the number of children with repeat open to child protection plans. What it does mean, though, is that as soon as there's smaller numbers, mean that the percentage that would be open for a second or subsequent child protection plan, it has a quicker kind of significant impact. So we want to be within the range of 12 and 20%, which would put us in line with London and national averages. And we are at the moment slightly above, but I do want to outline the context here of a reduced number of the overall cohort, which means that obviously then that has an impact on the percentages. So hopefully on both counts, assurances to the panel that A, there's a service grip in relation to this important indicator. This is why we report it to this panel. It's an important indicator of the quality and effectiveness of our interventions, but also there are sort of wider contextual circumstances here which are very interesting as well, which just maybe explain why we're just creeping outside of the range that we have set ourselves as a service. I wanted to make a quick point about the second section that you routinely have in front of you, which is around amendments, corrections, and data caveats. So the eagle-eyed amongst yourselves may have spotted that the list of caveats is steadily increasing, and I really want to make a plea that this is seen as a positive thing. It means that we are increasingly getting a handle on our performance information. So a point was already made today about. For example, our stability index, and it was mentioned in the corporate parenting report. So again, I want to really make a point that this is something that should be seen as a positive sign that as a service we're getting hold of what some of the underlying data issues are. And I also want to make the point that this is not just held within children's schools and families, but also there's a corporate ownership here. And by way of an update, we have attracted, Elle alluded to the fact already, but just to reiterate, funding for 2 additional posts to help us look at some of the system configuration that leads to the complications in us being able to pull out the information automatically and easily and report in a way that's, for example, to the Scrutiny Committee. The second thing I want to say is that we are putting in place where we do identify areas where we have data gaps, be that either that the data isn't recorded properly at the front end or the data is in the system but we can't adequately get it out and report on it. We are putting in place robust systems to make sure that we do know the information and the performance information in the service. So we're not operating in a evidence-free environment. We're operating in an environment where we might have to put some sticky tapes and band-aids onto the electronic reporting system, but we are definitely in a situation where we do have an understanding of what our performance is. And in that context, and again it was already alluded to, I think James, you made the point, the audit cycles are getting more robust, so we're also in a position where we can triangulate our information. So we're not just looking at the numbers, and I think today has been a really good demonstration, particularly in terms of the children open to second and subsequent child protection plan. So that type of conversation is happening within the service. So where we have maybe a concern, a numerical concern, we will look at that also to supplement that with qualitative information via our audits. And I think taken together gives us a really good grip on our performance. So I'll stop there and take any questions from anyone.
Two very simple questions. In the text, indicator 18 about the part of children's reviews, it says there are inconsistencies in the recordings of all has that been looked into? Is there a remedy, or are we still waiting for that? And the second one is indicators 33 and 34 about the needs. Now, I see from our figures we're half of the London average, and we're a third of the national averages, which is excellent. Have we found a magic bullet somewhere? But is that a general trend over months or 6 months, or is that just a statistical blip, or are we working that well that it's going down?
So in response to indicator number 18, so the concern we have is whether or not social workers are, or indeed independent reviewing officers are, recording whether or not a child has attended the review meeting. So it's a tick box or a box that needs to be responded to in the system. One of the mechanisms that we've introduced in recent months is what we call performance clinics, which is a structured conversation between the performance team and services, where we talk exactly about those sort of things. So every single data item that can be recorded at the sort of front end of the system will be discussed and will be exploring with the service where exactly information is recorded. So this was one where we can say our data caveat is I think our margins are relatively small, so actually we're relatively confident in it, and it's predominantly around an inputting issue that we're addressing with the service. Now that's opposed to some more complex issues which relate to where something's inputted at the front end of the system, but then can't be recorded and reported from sort of via existing reports. So I'd classify that particular indicator as one that is easily fixed with simple awareness raising in the service.
I'll comment on the awareness raising, because the main reason for anomalies in this indicator is whether social workers accurately record for under fives. So participation for children and young people is expected from 5 and over, but not from 5s, and some social workers would appear to be recording that as non-participation rather than as participation not being expected in that particular review meeting. So that's the discussion that needs to be resolved around that data point, and that's why it creates a modest question around the data, because that number of young people is actually quite low in the system. So the second item was around indicators 33 and 34, which is young people who are not in education, employment or training. The particular thing that you were asking about was that spike in September and how we compare to national and London neighbours. Now the spike in September occurs because, of course, that's the New Year start for young people continuing in education, and so they will have left their previous school, and they may be going on to college, they may be going on to sixth form, they may be going on to some other arrangement, but we have to track them down and find them. So it's entirely common for the September number of not knowns to be really high in comparison with the not knowns the rest of the year, because you kind of nail them down in September and then you know where they are for the rest of the year. So that spike is a recognised annual anomaly. The fact that we are lower on that spike than our national and London neighbours is a Merton good news story. You asked, have we found the magic bullet? I think we kind of have, but it's not as easy as point and shoot. What it is it's really diligent follow-up work. It's calling, it's door knocking for every single young person that we know of. It's tracking them down and tracing them and asking the question. And we do get a bit of feedback sometimes from parents. They don't want to talk to you, and they don't want to tell you about where they are, and they don't want to tell you about what they're doing. But that team is really, really persistent. So we resource it and we chase it up. And that's the answer. The only way to reduce your number of not knowns is to know. And the only way to know is to keep door knocking and phoning and calling until you've got an answer to that question. So that's the secret there.
Okay, thank you.
Carl, thank you for producing I'm usually quite good on graphs, but I don't understand the second chart. Okay. Maybe you can just explain that. But also, based on the child protection plans as well, with the number of children on child protection plans going down, and I understand because it's reduced so much, and therefore that's why the repeat ones are going like that. But I think my question and concern is, should children have remained on the child protection plan and come off one? And that's why it's increasing. It's just, I don't understand the criteria to come off the child protection plan and therefore something to happen to the child, and that's why the repeat children on child protection plan numbers is going up. And I don't understand.
No, I should apologise. I should have maybe explained slightly more. So the second graph you have in front of you are the absolute numbers in yellow of children who are on a child protection plan for the second or subsequent time. So what you see in January 2020, for instance, is that 22 children, as an absolute number, were on a repeat child protection plan. The blue line going across it is the percentage of that represents. So the 22 children out of a total of 99 represents 21%. So it's a percentage of the total, and that the blue line is what you have as a figure in the regular scrutiny data reports. It's a percentage, and the range we want to see that blue line in is between 12 and 20%. Is the range that we've defined as an acceptable range, because that is sort of nationally and London the range that we normally see. And again, the reason that this is an important indicator is children and families whose children come back on a child protection plan. It can tell you something about the quality and effectiveness of the interventions. You don't necessarily want to see children appearing for second and subsequent time. Rachel, do you want to take the second point around some of the reasons in terms of closing down child protection plans, and then the other points that remain?
So I'll say one more thing on the graph, which is that the absolute number of repeat plans is also coming down. So that's something to be clear about. So it's not just that 22 out of 99 is a high percentage, but it's also 22 is a smaller number of repeat plans than 30, which is the figure of repeat plans in April 2019, or 37, which is the number of repeat plans in December of 2018. So the absolute number of repeat plans is coming down, which is good news. For those 22 children who have a repeat plan, that's a repeat plan ever. So the first thing was that half of that number, children were aged 10 years old or older. And so what you've got is lifetime child protection intervention for those children. And so the older those children are, the more likely they are to have come off a plan perfectly legitimately because they're safe enough, they don't need to be on the plan anymore, and then sometimes a considerable period later come back onto the plan. So that's part of it. And then the features of those families are domestic abuse, parental substance misuse, and so those tend to be problems that while they may get better, they can be triggered by changes of circumstances. So sometimes domestic abuse is resolved by the ending of a relationship. Then sometime later a new relationship forms. Sadly, that relationship may also have domestic abuse in it. The period of time where there was no relationship, or there was a relationship where there was no domestic abuse, the children were safe in that family and it was appropriate for them not to be on a plan. Similarly with substance misuse, it's something which sadly people can be clean for a very long time and then they can find themselves in difficulties again, sometimes because of other pressures. So those are the kind of situations where it is possible to get better and for parenting to get better and for it to be entirely legitimate for children to come off a plan, and then regrettably sometimes those situations arise later, but it would be entirely inappropriate to sustain the children and the family on a plan for the kind of whole duration, just in case. I mean, it wouldn't be standard under the law, so it would be not a lawful intervention. what the commentary goes on to say, though, is that we do still think that we have got learning and development needs around this work, because having social workers that understand what the most appropriate direct social work interventions are, that really deliver sustainable change. In other words, that minimise the likelihood of those things occurring again, is where the kind of where the edge is, if you like. So it's not always possible to fix that in people's lives forever, but there is research, increasing research, which shows which interventions are more likely to make that change sustainable, and that's the bit that we really need to get social workers working on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Carl, for the information, and I've noted it, but as usual, you know I don't like the links. So I thought I'd get that one in.
Noted, thank you.
Yeah, just to back onto in case 33, 34, you said that the figures that you do around I don't think there had been an impact on the 3 youth workers vacancies. I don't know, were they ever filled, or are they not now going to be filled?
I'm really sorry, I don't know. So.
And then just a question to Carl. On in page 27, 28, it shows that it's including the special schools in the numbers, so they're all together with exclusions. Just wondered if that could be separated out rather than, or why is it all in one number?
I can answer that question. It's because children who are in our special schools are either in the primary phase or the secondary phase. So when we talk about primary exclusions, we're talking about children who are excluded from any of our primary schools or from the primary phase of one of the special schools. And for secondary exclusions, we're talking about exclusions for any child from one of our secondary schools or from the secondary phase of a special school, because they're in primary education or they're in secondary education, so their exclusion counts.
So you say special school, you're referring to
Poseidon Cricket Week.
And the other point that's denoted by the other point to make around this, that it could in theory also be a non-Merton resident that is excluded from a Merton school. The information we draw this from is the census information, which is school level information. So, and obviously we have non-Merton residents attending Merton schools. So it could be, in theory, in these numbers, someone who's a non-Merton resident, but it still is a primary or secondary exclusion.
seeing a specific number of exclusions from special schools?
I'm sure we could find that out, but the way this is presented is exactly as Rachel says. It's in primary or secondary, in secondary phase.
Does anyone else have a question? Anybody else have a question? Russell?
I was going to ask the question. I was going to ask the question if we're keeping it here, but we've run out of time, and most of my questions have been answered before anyway. About the exclusions. If the child, if it's a Merton school, it's a Merton child, then they go to the Smart Centre, don't they, presumably? If they're a Merton school and they're not a Merton child, what happens to the child then? Similarly, with presumably there are children educated after the borough, and if they're excluded from their schools, that's the responsibility of the borough, is it?
So when, for example, a Sutton child is excluded from a Merton school, the responsibility for resolving the education of that Sutton child falls to Sutton local authority. For a Merton child that's educated in a non-Merton school, if they're excluded from a non-Merton school, the responsibility for resolving their education falls to us, but they won't appear in the Merton school exclusion figures. Yeah? Yeah, I mean, our children would appear wherever they're excluded from school. Yeah.
But the Sutton children would show in our figures if
they're excluded from the Merton school.
Does anyone else have any questions? Thank you very much.
on the last item is the work programmes of 2021. Now, some suggestions have already been sent in. If anyone's got suggestions, Rosie can make a note now, or if you want to think about it, you can email Rosie and ask them to be put forward for the next cycle. But if anyone's got suggestions, please put them forward now.
I think
Oh, right, sorry.
Well, Jennifer
I'm
had
sorry.
a hand up first, but I'll go
Okay,
second. That's fine.
On the alternative education.
More information
Just
about
scrutiny of the whole.
alternative education.
Yeah, I'll be very quick. Some of these might actually be on there already, but I think it's been suggested, but and updating PPIs. Hopefully that will be on the list. Harrison. PPIs. I don't know what I'm thinking about PPIs. Sorry, Rachel. But anyway, let's just say there we go. PPIs. A further update on the Harris Academy Wimbledon, particularly once the site is open. I'd also like to have an update, probably around about this time next year, on what mental health training has been done and what's come out of that plan as part of that topic group. I know that there's been others being sent to you already, which include things like transport, overspending in foster care, in terms of some of that report to come back, some of which we discussed at the last meeting, but it's just a follow-on from that for scrutiny, and maximising apprenticeships, particularly for children with additional needs, and then also in terms of specialist schools for those children with additional needs. I don't know whether or not we need to review that, because I think I saw something where there was a report that had already been done, or whether or not we can actually bring that to, or just have that as reading material.
So there was the high needs review, which is the basis on which we're increasing the numbers of places and commissioning the expansion of Cricket Green and so forth. So that was a piece of work that was done, but can add that to the list.
It would be good to have, even if it's an update.
We did a task on successive training, success in, I can't talk today, I'm just so tired. Succession planning, that's it. So, if we can have an update on what's happening in Merton. Succession planning for teachers. Yes, because James and I were on that task group, and we don't know what's happened to it so far, so we need to know what's happened, because it did go to the cabinet, and it came through to scrutiny, and it seems to have died off. And since we're sort of lacking in getting head teachers and teachers into the borough, if you can let us know what's happening with it and how we're managing, or whether we're improving. Please.
Anyone else suggestions? But there is time. How long? What sort of time period do you want them in by?
It's supposed to close at the end of this week, but they're coming next week.
So if possible, Sunday night.
Yeah, midnight.
Sunday night. Thank you very much. Can I say thank you very much for certainly your questioning on various issues, the corporate parenting and the departmental update. There's a lot of good, I think, really good scrutiny and asking questions, and hopefully, and if you weren't satisfied, you came back with something else you want clarified. That's excellent. So thank you, Rachel Carr, Ellie and Kelly, for your input. I've already thanked the others. Thank you.
When's next meeting?
Next meeting is 24th of June. Before everyone just runs away, the next meeting is the 20th.